For centuries, the belief was that Mount Sinai, the place where God gave Moses the Ten Commandments, was located in Egypt.
For centuries, humanity has searched for the true Mount Sinai, the place where God descended in fire, where Moses received the Ten Commandments, and where the foundation of Christian faith was literally carved into stone. Most of us grew up associating Mount Sinai with a rugged peak in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, a site long venerated by tradition, tour guides, and religious institutions alike. But what if we've been looking in the wrong place all along? What if, buried in the desert sands of northwest Arabia, lies a mountain that matches, in vivid and astonishing detail, every element described in the Bible? Astonishing evidence found at Mount Sinai. Exodus 19:18 provides a striking description. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. This is a detailed, sensory description of a physical event that affected the earth itself. The passage emphasizes elements we can verify: smoke, fire, trembling ground, all implying dramatic geological or atmospheric activity. And critically, these aren't isolated mentions. The entire Exodus narrative anchors the Israelite encounter with God in real, tangible geography and natural phenomena. From a distance, the summit of Jabal al-Lawz looks distinctly black-charred, as if scorched by intense fire. Multiple satellite images confirm this phenomenon. The peak is visibly darker than the rest of the mountain, with a deep, coal-like appearance. But here's what's truly astonishing. The neighboring mountains in the same range show no signs of similar burning. They are untouched, bearing their natural rocky colors as if nothing ever happened. Why, then, does this one summit appear torched? Geologists who examined the area found no evidence of volcanic activity. The mountain is made of granite, not volcanic rock. And the blackening? It's only surface deep, suggesting a sudden exposure to extreme heat, not a long-term natural process. It's hard not to recall the words of Exodus 19:18. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire. Could this be the very mountain, one that still carries the scars of a divine encounter? While the summit points to fire just a short distance away, another feature points to water and another miracle. In the barren desert near Jabal al-Lawz stands an enormous 60-foot-high split rock, cleanly divided straight down the middle. It towers alone in the landscape, far from any geological fault lines or signs of erosion that might explain such a formation. Even more intriguing are the signs of ancient water flow at its base. Deep channels carved into the stone suggest that water once gushed from this rock, even though the area receives virtually no rainfall. This imagery should sound familiar. In Exodus 17, the Israelites, desperate for water, cried out to Moses. God instructed him to strike a rock at Horeb, and when he did, water poured out. As you move closer to the base of the mountain, the evidence becomes even more specific and chilling. There lies a large stone structure that appears to be an altar, built from wide, flat slabs. But surrounding it are carving petroglyphs of bulls and calves, etched into nearby stones. This kind of imagery is not typical of ancient Arabian art, which makes it all the more remarkable. But it aligns precisely with Exodus 32, where the Israelites, impatient for Moses' return, crafted a golden calf and began to worship it. These aren't random etchings, they tell a story of rebellion, a story of idolatry, a story the Bible told over 3,000 years ago and which now appears carved into the very stones of this site. Not far from the altar, another curious formation: 12 upright stone pillars, each standing distinctly apart yet clearly placed with intention. Though weathered by time, their presence is undeniable. And again, Scripture echoes in the background. In Exodus 24:4 it says, Moses built 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And now, in the shadow of Jabal al-Lawz, we find exactly that. Finally, encircling the base of the mountain are lines of stones laid in deliberate rows, forming a clear perimeter. They are not remnants of buildings, not agricultural walls, but boundaries. Why would anyone build such a border around a lonely desert peak? Because, according to Exodus 19:12, God commanded it. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not go up the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. These barriers are more than physical. They are spiritual reminders of divine holiness. The idea was clear. Do not cross, for the mountain had become sacred ground. And the fact that those stone markers still remain today, thousands of years later, a silent yet thunderous testament to how seriously that command was taken. A hidden mountain. The true mountain of God has been contested for millennia. The memory of its location has faded with time. The reasons for such a lapse of recollection are complex and controversial. Emperor Constantine, under the influence of his mother, Queen Helena, moved the Roman Empire under Christian rule. Influenced by pagan religions and cultures of idolatry, the Queen built monuments around sacred places of the Bible. One of such place was purportedly the site of the burning bush and the location of Mount Sinai. Though she never set foot on the land, she claimed that Mount Sinai was in the Egyptian peninsula. No one dared to question the Queen for hundreds of years, and as a result, this became the traditional site of Mount Sinai on the Sinai Peninsula. The problem is that this traditional location didn't fit with the Bible's description. This made it difficult for scholars to piece together the archaeological record. Because of the lack of evidence surrounding the traditional site, Bible scholars began to question the story of the Exodus itself. Archaeologists and anthropologists have missed the mark because of traditions and translations. Human error pushed us away from the truth. We have progressively forgotten the miraculous work of Yahweh in the Exodus. Remembering what we've forgotten is simple. We need to seek out the source of all truth, the written word of God. The Bible marks this body of water clearly in several places. One in particular outlines its location. It indicates the Gulf of Aqaba of the Red Sea that borders Saudi Arabia. And King Solomon made a navy of ships in Etzion-Geber, which is beside Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea, Yam Suf, in the land of Edom. The city of Etzion-Geber is written of 6 times in the Old Testament. It was on the north coast of the Gulf of Aqaba, part of the historical and current Red Sea. So why then is a location so clearly stated so easily muddled and confused? We can turn to the book of Isaiah for wisdom and understanding. Isaiah was a 7th century BCE prophet from Judah. He chastised God's holy people for adapting pagan cultures and religious practices. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 65, he speaks of God's people forgetting his holy mountain. In Hebrew, forgetting is deeper than not recalling. It is also attached to forgetting what occurred there, their marriage covenant to God. After their exile, rebuilding the temple was forefront in the minds of the rededicated Jews who sojourned back to Jerusalem. God's mountain became a place to remember a set of ideals more than a place of pilgrimage. The Israelites did not regard Mount Sinai as a holy mountain, so the memory of its location vanished. As scholars and academics uncover new archaeological evidence, Mount Sinai is being remembered. These discoveries have led to the ancient land of Midian across the Red Sea in northern Saudi Arabia. This land is what locals have called a particular summit, the Mountain of Moses. In the past, access to this region was outlawed. This mountain, named Jabal al-Lawz, was not spoken of except by locals who lived in the region. The real location is Mount Sinai. Conventional wisdom has long held it to be in the southern Sinai Peninsula, identifying it with Jabal Musa, Moses' mountain. This traditional belief asserts that the Israelites, crossing the Red Sea at the northern end of the western Gulf of Suez, made their way down into this part of the peninsula and camped at the foot of the mountain from where they received the laws of God. Yet over the past several decades, numerous alternative theories have mushroomed. One in particular has risen from the fringes to prominence. The belief that Mount Sinai is not located in the Sinai Peninsula, but rather in northwestern Saudi Arabia, and that the Israelites crossed the eastern Gulf of Aqaba to get to it. Adherents to the Saudi Arabia theory most commonly identify Mount Sinai with Jabal al-Lawz, Almond Mountain. Thanks to the efforts of enthusiasts and filmmakers over the last several decades, it has become such a popular theory that, in many areas, it has totally overshadowed the traditional Sinai location. But what about this question of Mount Sinai? Proponents of the Jabal al-Lawz theory bring to the table an immediately attractive visual spread: burned mountaintop, split rock, and carvings of cattle worship. But how watertight is their case? Is it enough to overthrow the traditional site of Mount Sinai in the southern Sinai Peninsula? And is the evidence behind the southern Sinai generally, and Jabal Musa specifically, really just artificially applied tradition without any historical or scriptural bones? Presently, there are dozens of different proposed sites for Mount Sinai. For your information, there are several foundational pillars to the theory of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. The Galatians pillar. The Apostle Paul in Galatians 4 mentions Mount Sinai in Arabia. Surely this can only mean that the mountain was located in Saudi Arabia rather than in the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula. Yet during this Roman period, the Sinai Peninsula was indeed classified as Arabian territory, part of a geographic region referred to by the Romans as Arabia Petraea. Thus, locating Mount Sinai within the Sinai Peninsula only fits with Paul's statement. And this Arabian delineation of the Sinai has been the status quo throughout much of history. The Sinai Peninsula equals Egypt pillar. This similarly holds that the Sinai Peninsula anciently constituted part of Egypt, and therefore, in order for the Israelites to be free, they must have crossed over on the other side, via the Gulf of Aqaba, into what is now Saudi Arabia. Yet on this, there is no question. The Sinai Peninsula was not considered part of ancient Egypt. Egypt did maintain a string of military fortresses in the northern Sinai, guarding the trade route into the Levant, fortresses that continued deep into Canaan. And Egypt also operated quite sporadically a number of mining outposts in the central Sinai. But they were just that, frontier outposts that had to be constantly guarded from marauding tribes during intermittent mining expeditions. The Yam Suf equals Aqaba pillar. Vert Kings 9:26 states that Solomon's navy was docked at Eloth, Eilat, on the shore of the Red Sea. This location is certainly on the northern end of the Gulf of Aqaba. As such, Saudi Arabia proponents argue that this must have been the body of water of the same name crossed by the Israelites, journeying into Saudi Arabia. 1 Kings 9:26 actually constitutes key evidence against an Aqaba crossing. In the Greek Septuagint, the 2nd century BCE Jewish translators rendered this gulf with a Greek name different to that used in every other reference to the sea crossed by the Israelites, implying that this gulf was not the body of water they crossed. But there is one pillar for the Sinai in Saudi Arabia theory that rises above them all. Later historians, such as Philo and Josephus, both 1st century CI, and Eusebius, 4th century CIA, are sometimes appealed to in suggesting a Mount Sinai in Midian. This reasoning follows that Moses fled from Egypt to Midian, a region of northwestern Saudi Arabia. Therefore, this must be the location of Mount Sinai. Yet classical historians are necessarily consulted because the Bible nowhere states that Mount Sinai was in Midian. If anything, it states the opposite. And to a degree, the same is true of these classical historians. An author and filmmaker stated in a 2021 interview that Philo specifically says that Mount Sinai is the tallest and most holy or sacred mountain in the district of Midian. While Philo does state that Moses had gone up into the loftiest and most sacred mountain in that district, he does not mention Midian. In fact, there is not a single mention of Midian in his entire text. Next, the interviewee quoted Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, which says that now Moses, when he had obtained the favor of Jethro, he stayed there in Midian, and he fed his flock. But sometime afterward, taking his station at the mountain called Sinai, he drove his flocks there to feed them. This is the highest of all the mountains thereabout. Yet again, the passage does not contain the words, in Midian. Midian is not mentioned at all in this chapter of Josephus. It is mentioned twice in chapter 11, once as a heading and once referring to the fleeing Moses in the city Midian. The fact that neither Philo's nor Josephus's quotes mention Mount Sinai in Midian makes the interviewee's conclusion all the more curious. So you have these two nearly identical statements: that Mount Sinai is in the region of Midian, and that it's the tallest mountain in the region. These statements are nearly identical, in that they don't mention Mount Sinai in Midian. Josephus never even mentions Midian or Midianites in the entirety of Book 3 of Antiquities, the book describing the Israelites at Mount Sinai. He does mention Midianites in Book 5 in the general context of the wilderness sojourn, specifically the posterity of Jethro, the Midianite, but notes that these relatives of Moses had left their own country and followed them, the Israelites, and accompanied them in the wilderness. Later authors aside, whose works regularly contradict one another, and often even the Bible itself, the Bible must serve as our baseline guide, and it never mentions Mount Sinai in Midian. The Bible does describe Moses as having fled from Egypt into Midian. This territory is broadly recognized as at least generally occupying the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia, primarily along the eastern side of the Gulf of Aqaba. Still, it's worth noting the ambiguity surrounding the exact extent of Midian. Yet Exodus 3:1 describes Moses' very distant journey to Mount Sinai. Now Moses was keeping the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the farthest end of the wilderness and came to the mountain of God. This word for backside is also used anciently to refer to the west. Directionally, the ancient world was east-oriented, facing the most obvious directional sign in the sky, the rising sun. Related words for left and right simultaneously referred to north and south, case in point Yemen, at the southernmost end of the Arabian Peninsula. Thus, this word relating to one's backside refers to the west, befitting the Sinai Peninsula, west of land traditionally associated with Midian. As such, several translations, such as the Revised Standard Version, say Moses went to the west side of the wilderness. Same westward conclusion, the description of Moses meeting Aaron, in the context of his return journey into Egypt. In Exodus 4:18, Moses returns to his family in Midian, where he sees his leave. In verse 20, he packs up his family and departs. Verses 24-26 describe an incident at an inn on the way to Egypt, in which Moses' family separates and evidently returns to Midian. You can compare this with Exodus 18:2-3. Exodus 4:27 then describes Aaron being told by God to go into the wilderness to meet Moses, where they reunite at the Mount of God, a mountain therefore logically located generally west of Midian and east of Egypt, within the Sinai Peninsula. But would such a long journey into the Sinai Peninsula have been unlikely for the shepherding Moses? Bedouin throughout history have regularly migrated to this peninsula in search of water and pasturage. Compared to neighboring regions, the southern mountainous region of the Sinai is surprisingly rich in water and vegetation during certain times of the year. Bedouin have been observed ascending these particular mountains during the summer months with their flocks, as explained in ancient Israel in Sinai. It's not unusual for ancient shepherds to take their herds exceptionally long distances. Recall the example of Jacob's shepherd sons. Joseph found them pasturing their sheep around 100 kilometers, 60 miles away from where they were supposed to be, and in the already fertile region of northern Canaan. Exodus 18 is another key passage that rather clearly implies that Mount Sinai was located outside of Midian. This is the account of Jethro's visiting family referenced by Josephus. Verse 27 states explicitly that Mount Sinai was located in another land, entirely to that in which Jethro lived. Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way into his own land. They logically inferred that Mount Sinai was not in his country of Midian, but located in an entirely separate country outside of it. Another logical question: if Mount Sinai really was in Midian, where are all the Midianites? Besides these journeying relatives of Moses, why are the Israelites, throughout their 40-year sojourn, never described as encountering them? Why do Midianites only appear just before the Israelites are about to enter Canaan on the eastern side of the Jordan River? The Israelites instead encounter others in the vicinity of Sinai, namely the Amalekites. Where are all the Midianites, whose numbers, less than 2 centuries afterward, overwhelmed Israel? Finally, if Mount Sinai really was in Midian, why doesn't the Bible, even the earliest classical historians, clearly say so in any of their many references? The Bible does not shy away from making such outright geographical references. Why is there no such direct reference? The logical conclusion seems almost resounding. Mount Sinai was not in Midian. Far from any of these pillars supporting Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, they do just the opposite. They support locating Mount Sinai in the farthest western end of the desert of ancient Arabia, the Sinai Peninsula. But what about Jabal al-Lawz, the split rock, the burnt mountaintop, and depictions of cattle worship? Will the real Mount Sinai please stand up? Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, who was also the priest of Midian. Moses led the flock to the back of the desert, coming to Horeb, the mountain of God, also known as Sinai. Controversy has long surrounded the actual location of Horeb or Sinai. Midian, where Moses fled after killing the Egyptian 40 years later, was located entirely in modern-day Saudi Arabia. This was ideal for Moses because it was outside of the control and influence of Egypt. However, Moses' decision to hide in Midian may have been influenced by the presence of the Egyptian military in the Sinai Peninsula. Pharaoh's soldiers were supervising the construction and operation of copper and turquoise mines throughout southern Sinai. Inscriptions on their walls and the surrounding ruins of ancient temples still provide visual evidence of Egypt's presence there during the years of Moses' exile. It is doubtful that, as a fugitive, Moses would have lived or traveled anywhere in South Sinai with an army committed to his capture close at hand. The prospects of sanctuary in Midian, however, were far more significant. After 40 years, Moses wandered to the base of Mount Sinai. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame from a burning bush. Moses looked and saw that the bush was burning with fire, even though it did not consume it. So, naturally, Moses did what anyone would do, right? He said, "Gee, there's a bush burning over there, but nothing is happening to it. That doesn't happen every day. Let me go get a closer look and check that out." When God saw that Moses was looking, he called to him. The first thing he had Moses do was take off his sandals, because the ground he was standing on was holy. Then God informed Moses that, even though it had been hundreds of years, God heard the cries and sorrows of the Israelites because of their taskmasters, so he was finally going to deliver them from Egyptian bondage and bring them to the land he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in Genesis. Furthermore, God let Moses know that he had been selected to go to Pharaoh to demand their release and lead them out. The Bible portrays the angel of the Lord as both God and yet distinct from God. Can you think of anyone else in the Bible described as separate from God and yet as God himself? Jesus said, "The Father and I are one." This ancient and creative way of portraying the Lord as a complex unity helps readers understand that he is a diverse yet unified community of love. This is foundational for understanding that perfect community of love, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that we have come to call the Trinity. The Lord interacts personally with humans while also maintaining his identity as God above all, yet entirely other. This God takes on an embodied form to relate with humanity, ultimately taking on human flesh to restore humanity to the right relationship as partners with him. This complex portrait of the angel of the Lord uniquely communicates truths about the character and identity of Yahweh, that he is a complex unity, one who is both unified and diverse, near and above all. What we see in the angel of the Lord is brought to a culmination in the person of Jesus. Jesus draws near to humanity to draw us near God. Given the biblical record, some believe that Mount Sinai must be in Midian. Several Jewish documents, some written hundreds of years before Christian traditions, locate the mountain of God in the Midianite territory. In 250 BC, a council of 70 scholars translated the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek for the first time. This Greek translation is called the Septuagint. Their translation of the Exodus account presupposed that Mount Sinai stood in the Arabian Peninsula. 3 centuries later, the Jewish philosopher Philo placed the mountain east of the Sinai Peninsula and south of Israel. At the same time, the Apostle Paul also located Mount Sinai in Arabia. Perhaps the most specific description of Sinai's location can be traced to the 1st century AD historian Josephus. He wrote that Mount Sinai was the highest of mountains near the city of Midian. Shortly after this account, Midian was identified in the Arabian Peninsula by the Greek geographer Ptolemy. The ruins of Midian lay just outside the modern-day town of Alba, near Saudi Arabia's northwest coast. Thus, the best modern-day candidate for this mountain is called Jabal al-Lawz, which means Mountain of Almonds. There is a tradition among the locals there that Mountain of Moses. Specific features of the mountain resemble the biblical description. Most prominent is a jagged peak more than 8,000 feet in elevation and blackened as if scorched by fire. Exodus 19:18 says, "Smoke covered Mount Sinai because the Lord came down on it in fire. The smoke rose up from it like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain trembled and shook." At its base was an enormous pile of boulders at least 15 feet high and 60 feet across from where Aaron built an altar in front of the golden calf. The flattened top of this structure has the appearance of being man-made. Etched into its rock faces were petroglyphs of bovine creatures, cattle and bulls. The distinctive horns in some of the inscriptions resemble those found on pictures of sacred Egyptian Apis bulls. Satellite photos of the area have revealed another geographical feature that parallels the biblical account. There is a sprawling plain of more than 10,000 acres. Flat, surrounded by mountains, and adjacent to the dried bed of an ancient river, it could have provided an ideal place for the Israelite encampment. After they started out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai. They camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Just west of the mountain stands another possible link to the Exodus account. A towering rock 60 feet high is split from top to bottom. Evidence of water erosion is etched into its base. The Lord broke open a rock, and streams of water poured out. They flowed like a river in the desert. As interesting as all this information is because it provides geographical evidence for the accuracy of the Bible, let's not lose sight of what is going on with the Israelites because God didn't. The Israelites groaned and cried out for help because they were slaves. God heard their groans, which took him back to the covenant he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So God looked at the Israelites with concern for them. Reflect on their situation and try to imagine what it would be like to live under those conditions. The whip of the cruel taskmaster was a daily reminder of their slavery. Maybe people are enslaved today by invisible taskmasters, not seen by the naked eye, but that is just as real as the Egyptian taskmasters. Perhaps your taskmaster is alcoholism, drugs, pornography, pride, people-pleasing, hatred, bitterness, anger, self-pity, or any number of things too numerous to list. The worst slave masters of all are not these things, though, but the one who uses them to enslave people. Satan, the god of this age, which is mentioned in 2 Corinthians 4:4, is the real enemy who seeks to use whatever he can to keep you in bondage, all the way to hell. On one occasion, Jesus was speaking to some Jews who had believed in him. He told them they were only really his disciples if they obeyed his teaching. The Jews, quite bafflingly, bragged that they were children of Abraham and had never been slaves of anyone. As such, they didn't see what they needed to be set free from. How could they make such a statement given the number of times in the past they had been captives in a foreign land? How could they say that when they were facing Roman occupation, at the very time they said they were slaves to no one? Jesus replied that everyone who sins is a slave to sin. A slave has no lasting place in the family, but a son belongs to the family forever. Only when Jesus sets you free from sin are you really free.
In particular, this mountain that Moses is standing on, this is Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb in the Bible.
Saudi Arabia is a country that is famous for its rich culture, history, and oil reserves. It is also the birthplace of Islam and the location of the two holiest cities for Muslims, Mecca and Medina. However, Saudi Arabia also has connections with Christians. This connection could shake the foundations of the faith and challenge the traditional views of many believers. This discovery challenges beliefs, rupturing faith's foundations. What are the findings of atheists in Saudi Arabia that clash with historical ideologies? Could these discoveries reshape history's understanding? I invite you to watch this video to see what is that connection and how it shocked the whole world. But before we come to the main part, I have a small challenge for you. Please try to answer the question to see how much you understand the Bible. Are you ready? Okay, so the question is, at what mountain did Moses receive the 10 Commandments? A. Sinai. B. Zion. C. Ararat. D. Gerizim. Thank you for your answer. It's quite easy, right? And the correct answer is also the main character of today's main topic, is Mount Sinai. The exact location of Mount Sinai is still a mystery. The connection we are talking about is Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is the sacred mountain where God revealed himself to Moses and gave him the 10 Commandments. Jews, Christians, and Muslims revere this mountain as a holy place where God communicated his will and guidance to his chosen prophet. God leads his people out of captivity in Egypt by the Pharaoh to this mount. It is here where Moses meets with God on this mount many times and eventually is given the 10 Commandments. It is also the setting for 3.5 of the first 5 books of the Bible. This mountain is a very significant part of the Old Testament. The exact location of Mount Sinai from the Bible has been disputed over the years. The earliest Christian traditions place Mount Sinai at modern-day Mount Jabal, which is the 5th largest mountain in Egypt. During the 6th century, historian Josephus believed that the highest mountain, Mount Catherine in Egypt, was the actual location for the biblical Mount Sinai. In the 3rd century AD, Christians settled on the modern Mount Sinai as the biblical location, which is on the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. In the 9th century, a Georgian colony was formed there, and they built their own churches in the area. Some of the Georgian manuscripts of Sinai remain there today, while others are kept in private collections. There is no firm consensus on where exactly Mount Sinai is located. Some believe it is located in Saudi Arabia because Moses fled in that direction during his exile. Modern archaeologist Emmanuel Anatim is convinced that he has found the biblical Mount Sinai at Har Karkum because he feels that some rock art at this location has biblical motifs. This is a 2,700-foot ridge in the southern Negev. Even with these modern findings, the exact location of the biblical Mount Sinai is still up for debate. What they found at Mount Sinai. Recently, atheists have made important discoveries related to this sacred mountain. Experts believe they've finally found one of the holiest sites in the Bible, miles from where it was previously assumed to have existed. They claim that they have found the actual mountain where, according to the Old Testament, Moses led the Israelites, a mountain that was enveloped in smoke, fire, and thunder, and where, at the top, Moses received the 10 Commandments from God, scorched mountain peak. In actuality, they say, Mount Sinai is Jabal Makla, which lies in the Jabal al-Lawz mountain range in northwestern Saudi Arabia. The Bible said, God descended on Mount Sinai as a fire, and they claim the mountain, with its clearly blackened peaks, suggests this is the site. One Middle East expert said, one of the main reasons certain scholars claim that the Exodus is a myth is because little to no evidence for what the Bible records have been found at the traditional Mount Sinai in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. But what if these scholars have actually been looking in the wrong spot? He noted. Move over into the Arabian Peninsula and you find incredibly compelling evidence matching the biblical account. Jabal Makla has blackened peaks as if scorched by the sun or fire, and lies near Nuweiba Beach, where scientists have found land paths underneath the water, where God would have parted the waters for Moses and the Israelites. Signs of path under Red Sea. In the book of Exodus, Moses holds out his walking stick, and God parts the waters, and they manage to flee. The story goes that the water then came rushing back in and crushed the pursuing troops. They believe Nuweiba Beach is the most likely crossing point because studies have found land paths below the water. It is claimed they found what they believe were the shapes of chariots which were encased in coral, although the metal and wood had long since dissolved. Across the Red Sea, there is said to be evidence that is allegedly a possible match for the biblical campsite Elim, noted to have 12 wells and 70 palm trees, with a dozen of the water sources remaining today. Mount Horeb, split rock. Though they were followed by Egyptians in chariots, when the Israelites reached land on the other side of the water, the sea consumed the Egyptians. On the way from the beach to the possible Sinai is a large split rock with signs of water erosion, despite being in the midst of a desert. Experts said, "We believe this distinct landmark could be the rock that God commanded Moses to strike, which water then gushed forth from miraculously providing for the Israelite population." The experts also discovered a site that appeared to be an altar near the base of the mountain, akin to the altar Moses is said to have built at the foot of Mount Sinai from uncut stones. At the western end or back of the mountain are Rephidim, where Moses and the Israelites initially camped before reaching Mount Sinai. It was here that Moses struck the rock above, causing a large amount of water to gush out. The giant, 60-foot-tall rock sits on a 300-foot-high hill and has clear signs of water disintegration, but it's located in this harsh desert area. The crack in the rock was so large that an adult could quickly pass through it. Moses' altar. At Jabal al-Makla, there is an ancient altar site composed of uncut granite stones at the base of the mountain, and the remains of what appear to be small ancient pillars composed of marble beside it, just as in the book of Exodus. Moses is said to have built an altar made of uncut stones at the base of Mount Sinai and sets up 12 pillars, representing the 12 tribes of Israel beside it. So far, 9 pillars have been found, with several broken pieces of marble scattered throughout the area. Golden Calf Worship Site. 2 more crucial pieces of evidence at this mountain are what is believed to be the Golden Calf Worship Site and signs of a graveyard. Chapter 32 of Exodus tells of the Golden Calf incident, where the Israelites make a golden calf, which was an Egyptian god, and worship it while Moses is on Mount Sinai. When Moses comes back down the mountain, the golden calf worshippers are killed for their idolatry. Close to the mountain, "We have this site covered with depictions of people worshiping bulls and cows," they said. And what's really significant is that these petroglyphs are isolated to this area. It's not like they're carved all over the mountain. 12 ancient Jewish petroglyphs feature a recognizable bull, petroglyphs of the Egyptian calf gods. The pagan petroglyph was worshipped by the Jews while they anxiously awaited the return of Moses from the mountaintop. It is said that the golden calf was placed on these rocks. Large altars were also discovered on the east and west sides of the mountain. While these features and archaeological remains line up well with the biblical accounts, the researchers have been hampered by the fact that part of the area is fenced off for protection by the Saudi theocratic regime. In the coming years, they plan more trips to Saudi Arabia and to other candidates for Mount Sinai to further investigate evidence of the Exodus. Which mountain is the real Mount Sinai? Putting aside the discoveries about Sinai in Saudi Arabia, let's turn to the Bible to see what this sacred book says about the location of this holy mountain. Where is the real Mount Sinai? No one really knows for sure. For centuries, scholars, explorers, and pilgrims have sought the location of the real Mount Sinai. To this day, several sites have been proposed, but no one site has been confirmed by archaeology as the place where God met with Moses. The Bible gives us some general clues about the location of Mount Sinai. We know it was outside of Egypt because the Israelites came to Mount Sinai after leaving Egypt. You can see this in Exodus chapter 19, verse 1. Scripture also hints that Sinai was not in Midian, based on Moses' Midianite in-laws leaving Sinai to return to their own land. See Exodus chapter 18, verse 27, and Numbers chapter 10, verses 29 to 31. The traditional site of Mount Sinai is in the south-central part of the Sinai Peninsula. The mountain, today called Jabal Musa, the mountain of Moses, has an elevation of 7,497 feet above sea level. In AD 530, St. Catherine's Monastery was constructed at the northern foot of Mount Sinai. At the peak are a Christian chapel and an Islamic mosque. The ancient library at Jabal Musa was the source of Codex Sinaiticus, one of the major Greek texts used to aid Bible translation. Other locations proposed for Mount Sinai include sites in the western, central, and northern parts of the Sinai Peninsula. One theory identifies Mount Sinai as the modern Mount Yeroham in the northern Negev desert. Others see Sinai as being in southern Edom, or Seir, which is mentioned in Deuteronomy 33:2. Another view places Mount Sinai in northwestern Saudi Arabia, associating it with the mountain called Jabal Makla, or Jabal al-Lawz today. In Galatians 4:25, Paul mentions Mount Sinai in Arabia. It's good to keep in mind that Arabia in the ancient world is not to be equated with Saudi Arabia in the modern world. The biblical term Arabia covers a vast area, including what we now call Saudi Arabia and the Sinai Peninsula. So, where is the real Mount Sinai? No one can say for sure. Scholars differ widely on proposed sites. Even if scientists think that the location of Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia, they still need more time to prove the evidence they find. The forgotten mountain of God. The true mountain of God has been contested for millennia. The memory of its location has faded with time. The reasons for such a lapse of recollection are complex and controversial. Emperor Constantine, under the influence of his mother Queen Helena, moved the Roman Empire under Christian rule. Influenced by pagan religions and cultures of idolatry, the Queen built monuments around sacred places of the Bible. One of such places was purportedly the site of the burning bush and the location of Mount Sinai. Though she never set foot on the land, she claimed that Mount Sinai was in the Egyptian peninsula. No one dared to question the Queen for hundreds of years, and as a result, this became the traditional site of Mount Sinai on the Sinai Peninsula. The problem is that this traditional location didn't fit with the Bible's description. This made it difficult for scholars to piece together the archaeological record. Because of the lack of evidence surrounding the traditional site, Bible scholars began to question the story of the Exodus itself. Archaeologists and anthropologists have missed the mark because of traditions and translations. Human error pushed us away from the truth. We have progressively forgotten the miraculous work of Yahweh in the Exodus. Remembering what we've forgotten is simple. We need to seek out the source of all truth, the written word of God. The Bible marks this body of water clearly in several places. One in particular outlines its location. It indicates the Gulf of Aqaba of the Red Sea that borders Saudi Arabia. And King Solomon made a navy of ships in Etzion-Geber, which is beside Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea, Yam Suf, in the land of Edom. The city of Etzion-Geber is written of 6 times in the Old Testament. It was on the north coast of the Gulf of Aqaba, part of the historical and current Red Sea. So why then is a location so clearly stated so easily muddled and confused? We can turn to the book of Isaiah for wisdom and understanding. Isaiah was a 7th century BCE prophet from Judah. He chastised God's holy people for adapting pagan cultures and religious practices. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 65, he speaks of God's people forgetting his holy mountain. In Hebrew, forgetting is deeper than not recalling. It is also attached to forgetting what occurred there, their marriage covenant to God. After their exile, rebuilding the temple was forefront in the minds of the rededicated Jews who sojourned back to Jerusalem. God's mountain became a place to remember a set of ideals more than a place of pilgrimage. The Israelites did not regard Mount Sinai as a holy mountain, so the memory of its location vanished. As scholars and academics uncover new archaeological evidence, Mount Sinai is being remembered. These discoveries have led to the ancient land of Midian across the Red Sea in northern Saudi Arabia. This land is what locals have called a particular summit, the Mountain of Moses. In the past, access to this region was outlawed. This mountain, named Jabal al-Lawz, was not spoken of except by locals who lived in the region. And as I said, scientists are still working very hard to find the truth about Mount Sinai. The significance of Mount Sinai. The Israelites are led from captivity in Egypt to Mount Sinai by God, leading them as a cloud in the day and a fire at night. God tells Moses to climb the mountain, and it is on the mount that God offers a covenant to the Israelite people. The people see lightning and clouds, and hear God saying the 10 Commandments to Moses. This experience is terrifying for the Israelites. Afterward, they ask not to hear God's voice, but to obey whatever God speaks to Moses. Moses agrees and returns to the mountaintop on his own. When he returns to the mountaintop, God gives the law to Moses. Moses then returns Saudi Arabia is known for its harsh climate and extremely low rainfall. Yet, a phenomenon occurring in this arid desert area has astonished everyone, even scientists. The desert is gradually transforming into a fertile agricultural land. Many people are becoming worried, thinking that nature is angry. But what we are about to share with you will surprise you even more, as everything happening in Saudi Arabia right now seems to be a scenario foretold long ago, coinciding with the time God intended it to happen. Join us as we explore the true messages behind the strange phenomenon occurring in the Saudi Arabian desert. Something weird is happening. Saudi Arabia has received at most 150 millimeters of rain yearly. Most of Saudi Arabia has been very dry, with just a tiny portion of the southwest area suitable for cultivation. Recently, in the arid landscape of the Saudi desert, an astonishing yet unusual sight has emerged: a vibrant green oasis, courtesy of recent heavy rains. This remarkable transformation has captivated both locals and visitors alike, which turned the once barren landscape into a lush haven of flourishing flora. Heavy rains have given new birth to these barren landscapes, making them blossom in myriad hues of green. Recent reports state that a substantial spell of rain has occurred in a section of Saudi Arabia's expansive desert terrain, notably in the area between the revered cities of Mecca and Medina. This remarkable weather event has triggered a remarkable metamorphosis, rejuvenating once barren and parched landscapes into flourishing vistas adorned with vibrant greenery. If you think this phenomenon is normal, then let's see what Islam has to say about it. The hour will not be established until wealth is so abundant and overflowing that a man will go out with his wealth to give alms, but not find anyone who accepts it from him, and until rivers and meadows return to the land of Arabia. Prophecy about the desert being fulfilled right now. One of the most striking predictions in the Bible is the transformation of the desert into a place of life and beauty, a symbol of hope and redemption, like what is happening in Saudi right now. Isaiah 35:1 tells us that, "The wilderness and the wasteland shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose." This verse speaks of a time when the dreary and lifeless region will one day be transformed into a thriving oasis, like the barren desert turning into lush green land. What happened in the Saudi Arabia desert demonstrates how the Bible's prophecy of the desert blossoming like a rose is being realized right before our eyes. It serves as a potent reminder of how accurate the prophecies in the Bible are. The transformation of the desert into a place of life and beauty is a powerful testament to the accuracy and relevance of the Bible's teachings. As we continue to push back the darkness in this generation, we can take comfort in the knowledge that God's promises are being fulfilled and that a brighter future is within our reach. When something weird happens, like the unusual transformation of the desert, and anxieties multiply, we can wonder if they are signs of the end times. Our own voice from childhood may echo in our head. Could this be the end of the world? What many really fear is more immediate. Could this be the end of our world? Will persecution escalate? Will our community be overrun by evil and violence? The book of Revelation is filled with strange creatures, hidden answers, and surprising peace. Revelation 6 tells of the red horse whose rider has the authority to remove peace from the earth. There's a pale green horse whose rider is death. It kills with the sword, famine, disease, and wild animals. Yikes, these things are happening. And they have been happening since John received his revelation. Prophecy about the end times shows up in many parts of the Bible, not just in Revelation. And it all points to the same conclusion. Jesus and his faithful followers are the ultimate survivors. God wins. Satan loses. Living faithful lives until our last day is what we are called to do. As we learn more about the end times, we will find truth to apply to our current times. We will find God's truth leads us through any triumph and any tribulation. We can marvel at the angels and the Lamb with 7 horns and 7 eyes. We can try and picture the 4 living beings and God's throne. We can shudder at the dragon, the beast with horns, and the massive locusts. Every word and every strange creature points to God's sovereignty. His victory encourages us to shift our focus from the fear of the end time to the faith of our time. The Holy Spirit is increasing the faith of His people even today. Have you seen it, felt it? Many of us are living as the bright lights we're called to be. We are eager to learn and share His word. We live in love as God commands, no matter our circumstances. When we encounter puzzling language in books of prophecy, like Revelation, it's important to keep it in perspective. We must remember the message of the whole Bible. God created us, and though we turn away and fail to hear Him, He reaches down in love to redeem us. When we look at language and metaphors and symbols in the scriptures from that perspective, we avoid some common distractions. We keep from getting lost in discerning or divining secret symbolic events or doing the math on when the world will end. We remember that the most important thing for us is to share the love and truth of Jesus. And we can read and talk about these awe-inspiring and sometimes terrifying verses without fear. As we said above, it all points to God's power and glory. What do we do now? How should we live? We don't know when the world will end or when our lives will be over, but we know God still has a mission and a calling for us. Jesus says to the churches in Revelation 2 and 3, "I know all the things you do." Early in chapter 1, John claims, "God blesses the one who reads this prophecy to the church, and He blesses all who listen to it and obey what it says." We have to hear the word to know how to be obedient to the Alpha and Omega. Another person can't dictate how we live for Christ. Each relationship with the Lord is separate and personal. Try to live for Christ each day, to love one another, and go about our business without fear. Our purpose is to be the best Jesus followers we can be. That God-centered life looks different for each of us. Some of us are learning to be faithful parents or grandparents. Some are working in hospitals, restaurants, and grocery stores. Some of us are staying home, alone, waiting for a new season to arrive. Jesus would say, the new season starts today. We all know we are called to focus on the Lord and others, and not be consumed with circumstances or ourselves. Jesus preached, loved, prayed, counseled, healed. He calls us to follow His example. The possibilities for showing love abound. Prayer is open to all the time. If we have a gift for listening, counseling, wisdom, or discernment, we'll use it all we can. So many people are hurting both physically and emotionally. How can we help them heal? We can be strengthened by Jesus' words. "I tell you the truth, anyone who believes in me will do the same works I have done, and even greater works, because I am going to be with the Father." One day, we will all go to be with the Father. For today, we set our minds on bringing Christ glory and honor. We live in love, act in faith, and walk as His children, till the end of the day, till the end of all days. What gonna happen with Mecca and Medina? Mecca and Medina are considered the two areas with the most noticeable greening transformation. Even more astonishing is that these two cities are very likely the places where the prophecy of the Bible, mentioned in Isaiah 21, is being fulfilled. Isaiah 21 prophesies a chain of end-time events that begin with Iran invading Saudi Arabia and end with the fall of a city in Arabia. Identified as Mystery Babylon in Revelation, this city is most likely Mecca or Medina. This chapter contains 3 prophetic oracles concerning Arabia, described in verse 1 as the desert by the sea. The Arabian Peninsula is surrounded by sea on 3 sides, the Persian Gulf on the east, the Indian Ocean to the south, and the Red Sea to the west. The first oracle describes Arabia's invasion by the Medes and Persians, corresponding to modern-day Iran. Surprisingly, when this region falls, the announcement is, "Babylon has fallen, all the idols of her gods lie shattered on the ground." Clearly, this is not a description of the ancient city of Babylon, which lay inland between 2 rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, but not by the sea. Revelation 17-18 describes the fall of a city that is cryptically called Mystery Babylon. In Revelation 18:2, the announcement of its fall is fallen. Fallen is Babylon the Great. So Isaiah 21 is an important clue that Mystery Babylon refers to a city in Arabia, not in Mesopotamia. And the announcement, all the images of its gods lie shattered on the ground, further identifies this city as a center of religious worship. The obvious conclusion is that Isaiah 21 and Revelation 17:18 are talking about the same event, the fall of a city in Arabia that is a center of religious worship. It may seem strange that the Bible figuratively refers to a city in Arabia as Babylon. However, Babylon's last king, Nabonidus, extended the Babylonian Empire into northern Arabia, as far south as Yathrib, Medina. In fact, he spent most of his reign in his Arabian colony in Tema, known today as Tema. He left his son Belshazzar to rule Babylon as regent, described as the king of Babylon in Daniel 5:30. Nabonidus was a worshipper of the Babylonian moon god Sin rather than the primary Babylonian god Marduk, and he may have preferred to live in Arabia where the worship of Sin was long established. Whether or not one identifies Allah as an evolved form of this moon god, it is significant that in the 7th century AD, the crescent moon symbol of Sin was adopted as the symbol of Islam. Verse 2 tells us, "The deceiver deceives, the destroyer destroys," and it goes on to describe the attack by Iran. The deceiver likely refers to the Antichrist, of whom Daniel 8:25 says, "By his treachery he will succeed through deceit. He will have an arrogant attitude, and he will destroy many who are unaware of his schemes." Ezekiel 38 tells us that Gog, another name for the Antichrist, is the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, indicating that he is a ruler of modern-day Turkey. It also identifies Persia, Iran, as one of his allies. Psalm 120 also describes his deceitfulness and makes a connection between Meshech, Turkey, and Kedar, Arabia. It seems likely that Saudi Arabia will form an alliance with Turkey, but Turkey will deceive Saudi and make its own alliance with Iran, Saudi's arch-enemy. Saudi trusts Turkey, but Turkey betrays Saudi and gives Iran the green light to attack. In verse 3, as Isaiah sees this vision of Iran invading Arabia, he experiences stomach cramps like a woman's labor pains. Similarly, Micah pictures the inhabitants of end-time Jerusalem like a woman screaming in the agonies of labor when Jerusalem falls to the Antichrist. Micah 4:9-10, 5-3. In Matthew 24:8, Jesus described several pre-tribulation events as the beginning of birth pains because they point to the coming fall of Jerusalem at the beginning of the Great Tribulation. In Revelation 12:1-2, Israel is portrayed metaphorically as a woman in labor, and the second coming as the arrival of her baby. So here in verse 3, we see the beginning Archaeologists have claimed to have located the holy mountain where the Bible says God gave Moses 2 stone tablets inscribed with the 10 Commandments. That holy place is Mount Sinai, as known as the Mountain of God. For a long time, this place has hidden astonishing secrets. Until the explorers gathered the courage to uncover all that was buried here, what they found shocked not only believers, but also atheists. It was evidence that a period of church history had indeed occurred here, signs that there had once been signs of life at this sacred mountain. If you are curious, please join us when we reveal all the secrets that might shock the whole world. The journey to discover the real mountain of God. Why would anyone look for Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia? Most modern maps in Bible dictionaries and commentaries identify a location in the Sinai Peninsula. If one looks closer at most of those maps, though, you will see some question marks. There are actually 8 mountain peaks that have been proposed as the site of the real Mount Sinai. The peak at St. Catherine's Monastery is the most popular, but it is not based on any archaeological research, but rather the vision of a mystic. However, the Bible clearly states that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. Therefore, the explorers were determined to search for it in Saudi Arabia. There were reports from David Fasold and Ron Wyatt, who claimed to have scouted Jabal al-Lawz, which bore all the distinctive marks of the real Mount Sinai. Unfortunately, Fasold was arrested by Saudi police and spent a terrifying week in jail being charged by the king's prosecutor with robbing Saudi Arabia of its wealth from antiquity. He was stripped of all his film, video footage, notes, and other evidence that he had accumulated to authenticate his find. In 1984, Ron Wyatt and his sons had been detained and interrogated for 75 days after exploring Jabal al-Lawz. Fasold and Wyatt had written to Jim Irwin of the High Flight Foundation in the hope that an astronaut of Irwin's stature might be able to gain official clearance to mount an exploration of the peak. Jabal al-Lawz was situated in the middle of a Saudi military reservation, fenced in by chain link and barbed wire fence. It was to reach this forbidden, politically explosive archaeological site that galvanized scientists to embark on their mission to Saudi Arabia. They were well aware that Saudi Arabia is one of the most politically oppressive nations on earth. Not one church, not even a synagogue, is allowed in all of Saudi Arabia. Religious police enforce stringent dress codes. Missionary work is illegal. This discovery is a dramatic story of how the explorers conspired to enter the country and launch across an ocean of fire-baked wilderness, crossing rocky crags and scaling the 8,000-foot Jabal al-Lawz, which the locals called the Mountain of Moses. The summit of Jabal al-Lawz was found to be scorched black. The dirt and rock were burnt black and shiny, like melted black plastic. Clearly, something unnatural and intensely hot had incinerated the mountaintop. Assuming the mountain to be volcanic, scientists broke one rock in half, revealing an inner core of plain brown granite. What kind of heat could have melted the surface rock to a black marble glaze and leave the underlying granite intact? They opened their Bible to Exodus 19:18-19. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. Exodus 24:17 states that the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire on top of the mountain. The forgotten mountain of God. The true mountain of God has been contested for millennia. The memory of its location has faded with time. The reasons for such a lapse of recollection are complex and controversial. Emperor Constantine, under the influence of his mother, Queen Helena, moved the Roman Empire under Christian rule. Influenced by pagan religions and cultures of idolatry, the queen built monuments around sacred places of the Bible. One of such places was purportedly the site of the burning bush and the location of Mount Sinai. Though she never set foot on the land, she claimed that Mount Sinai was in the Egyptian peninsula. No one dared to question the queen for hundreds of years, and as a result, this became the traditional site of Mount Sinai on the Sinai Peninsula. The problem is that this traditional location didn't fit with the Bible's description. This made it difficult for scholars to piece together the archaeological record. Because of the lack of evidence surrounding the traditional site, Bible scholars began to question the story of the Exodus itself. Archaeologists and anthropologists have missed the mark because of traditions and translations. Human error pushed us away from the truth. We have progressively forgotten the miraculous work of Yahweh in the Exodus. Remembering what we've forgotten is simple. We need to seek out the source of all truth, the written word of God. The Bible marks this body of water clearly in several places. One in particular outlines its location. It indicates the Gulf of Aqaba of the Red Sea that borders Saudi Arabia. And King Solomon made a navy of ships in Etzion-Geber, which is beside Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea, Yam Suf, in the land of Edom. The city of Etzion-Geber is written of 6 times in the Old Testament. It was on the north coast of the Gulf of Aqaba, part of the historical and current Red Sea. So why then is a location so clearly stated so easily muddled and confused? We can turn to the book of Isaiah for wisdom and understanding. Isaiah was a 7th century BCE prophet from Judah. He chastised God's holy people for adapting pagan cultures and religious practices. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 65, he speaks of God's people forgetting his holy mountain. In Hebrew, forgetting is deeper than not recalling. It is also attached to forgetting what occurred there, their marriage covenant to God. After their exile, rebuilding the temple was forefront in the minds of the rededicated Jews who sojourned back to Jerusalem. God's mountain became a place to remember a set of ideals more than a place of pilgrimage. The Israelites did not regard Mount Sinai as a holy mountain, so the memory of its location vanished. As scholars and academics uncover new archaeological evidence, Mount Sinai is being remembered. These discoveries have led to the ancient land of Midian across the Red Sea in northern Saudi Arabia. This land is what locals have called a particular summit, the Mountain of Moses. In the past, access to this region was outlawed. This mountain, named Jabal al-Lawz, was not spoken of except by locals who lived in the region. And as I said, scientists are still working very hard to find the truth about Mount Sinai. So now, let's find out what scientists have found in this holy mount. The first one is ancient human remains. 7 footprints pressed into the parched sediment of an ancient lake bed in northern Saudi Arabia may testify to humans' presence in the region some 115,000 years ago. Archaeologists scouring the Nefud Desert spotted the impressions while examining 376 footprints left in the mud of the bygone body of water by such animals as giant extinct elephants, camels, buffalo, and ancestors of modern horses. Now, a new analysis published argues that anatomically, modern humans created the 7 footprints about 121,000 years ago. If confirmed, the footfalls would be the oldest traces of Homo sapiens ever found on the Arabian Peninsula. The find could help reveal the routes ancient humans followed as they pushed out of Africa into new territory. Most non-African people alive today have ancestors who departed the continent en masse some 60,000 years ago. But some researchers think that smaller groups of Homo sapiens ventured outside of Africa thousands of years prior to this mass migration, journeying across the Sinai Peninsula and into the Levant. Other scholars propose a route centered on the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. In addition to the footprints, the lake bed, nicknamed Alathar, Arabic for the trace, yielded a trove of 233 fossils. Though the peninsula is now home to arid deserts, it was likely greener and wetter at the time the footprints were cast, boasting a climate similar to that of the African savanna. The presence of large animals such as elephants and hippos together with open grasslands and large water resources, may have made northern Arabia a particularly attractive place to humans moving between Africa and Eurasia, says study co-author Michael Petraglia, an archaeologist at the Max Planck Institute for Science and Human History, in a statement. Though the site may have once been a fruitful hunting ground, researchers found no stone tools or animal bones bearing the telltale marks of butchery. Per the statement, this dearth of evidence suggests the humans' visit to the lake was likely just a brief stopover. The team identified the fossilized footfalls as human by comparing them with tracks known to be made by humans and Neanderthals, a related but separate species of hominin. The 7 footprints featured in the study were longer than the Neanderthal tracks and appeared to have been made by taller, lighter hominins. The team can't completely exclude Neanderthals as the potential authors of the footprints. But if the dating proves correct, such an attribution is unlikely, as the sediments just above and below the impressions date to a period called the last interglacial, when the climate in the region was relatively warm and wet. The footprints therefore most likely represent humans, or Homo sapiens. The Cave of Elijah is the second found. Elijah traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. Just below the summit of Jabal al-Lawz sits a sizable cave, the Cave of Elijah, large enough for a man to stand up inside. There is no cave on the traditional Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula, as Scripture describes. Note the large, sprawling plain at the base of the mountain that would have provided an ample campsite for the Hebrew multitude. Then we come to the Rock of Horeb. On the slope of Jabal al-Lawz stood a towering pillar of rock, split laser-fine straight down the middle, approximately 20 inches wide from top to bottom. Was this the rock split at Horeb? Exodus 17:5-6. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go, I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. The explorers saw massive water erosion at the base of the split rock. These water-polished boulders lie in the natural stream bed that runs down from the split rock, an ancient watershed furnishing clear evidence of a fast-rushing stream into a lake large enough to provide water for millions in the desert. He brought streams out of the rocky crag and made water flow down like rivers. When he struck the rock, water gushed out, and streams flowed abundantly. The stone pillars. Moses set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Strewn near the V-shaped altar, toppled over and broken in sections, lay the hewn stumps of stone pillars. Scientists counted them and found 12 stumps, perhaps the remains of the pillars of Moses erected to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. It was the sum of evidence located above the mountain that spoke to the authenticity as the real Mount Sinai. The boundary markers. God ordered Moses to put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not go up the mountain or touch the foot of it. Exodus 19:12. People can see sun-bleached pillars. Around Jabal al-Lawz, they saw piles of sun-bleached rocks arranged at 400-yard intervals in a perfect semicircle. They believed that the orderly arranged rocks were the sacred markers which God ordered Moses to put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them to be careful not to go up the mountain or touch the foot of it. Were the orderly arranged rocks the works of Moses' own hands? The bitter waters of Marah. The bitter waters of Marah. Scattered throughout the oasis were a network of primitive cisterns, exactly 12, as Scripture describes. Lined with cement to prevent seepage, the springs contained the sweetest tasting water scientists had ever tasted, leading them to believe they had stumbled across Elim's palm-shaded rest stop. Was this where Moses and his parched countrymen found rest and refreshments? Geographical evidence. Not far from the oasis lay the town of Al-Bad, where the locals insist that Moses once pitched his tents. 35 kilometers east of the Straits of Tiran, 3 days walking inland from the Red Sea crossing side, they saw a vast alkaline mud flat, pocked with bitter springs. The scripture relates, "For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter." On the trail to Jabal al-Lawz, the explorers also discovered an oasis, which closely matched the biblical description of the 12 springs and 70 palm trees where the children of Israel had camped. The springs and palms. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. Exodus 15:27. Had the duo stumbled across the 70 palms of Elim? On the trail to Jabal al-Lawz, precisely where the Bible suggests it should be, is a true oasis in the middle of the desert. Scientists enjoyed the shade the grove had to offer, which closely resembled the scriptural descriptions. The mysterious underwater reef, as seen above, is the physical embodiment for the road in the depths, described in Isaiah 51:10. Believed by the authors to be actual Red Sea crossing spot, the sliver of ghost white reef is strategically placed landmass that might have allowed Hebrew multitudes to cross the depths abyss of the Gulf of Aqaba. The path through the Red Sea. The reef also reveals the mysterious underwater land bridge which the children of Israel would have crossed the Red Sea over. Your path led through the sea, your way through the mighty waters, though your footprints were not seen. A 500-meter-wide coral reef, invisible on the surface, yet spanning the entire strait like a stealth aircraft carrier, was evidently the road in the depths. Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the deep, who made a road in the depths of the sea so that the redeemed may cross over? The scriptures clearly state that the Israelites went out of Egypt. As Sinai was in Egypt, the Straits of Tiran were clearly the crossing point, as their discovery of the springs of Marah and Elim on the road to Jabal al-Lawz clearly proved. By the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The surging waters stood firm like a wall. The deep waters congealed in the heart of the sea. The waters in the straits reach up to 700 feet, and some parts of the Red Sea have great cliffs dropping off to depths of up to 3,000 feet. However, at the Straits of Tiran, the underwater land bridge is impeccably positioned at one of the shallowest points on the Gulf, showing how the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. As the scripture reports that the entire nation of Israel crossed the expanse by the last watch of the night, it would indicate that the total walking time was not much more than 5 to 6 hours. Only at the Straits of Tiran would such a quick nighttime crossing been possible. The distance from shore to shore along both branches of the sea averages from 10 to 20 miles. However, at the Straits of Tiran, the distance is no more than 2 miles. God providently provided a walking bridge at the only point on the Gulf where a multitude could cross, in a single night, on dry ground, with the wind making a wall of water on both sides. This astonishing convergence of geological and oceanographic anomalies exist at just the right place to confirm the biblical record and to provide an escape for the children of Israel from the Sinai Peninsula 3,500 years ago. The hidden reef, which satellite photographs confirm is the only one across the Red Sea, becomes a giant compass arrow pointing due east to the Arabian side of the Gulf, the land of Midian, and the real Mount Sinai. Fossil evidence. Humanity originated on the African continent at least 300,000 years ago. We know from fossil evidence in southern Greece and the Levant, modern-day Israel, that some early members of our species expanded beyond Africa around 200,000 years ago, and again between 120,000 to 90,000 years ago. They likely traveled through the Sinai Peninsula, which formed the only land bridge connecting the continent of Africa to the rest of the world, before moving north into a landscape with a Mediterranean climate. But it was not known at what point humans turned south after crossing the Sinai Peninsula, reaching modern-day Saudi Arabia. It is also often assumed that they may have taken a coastal route, avoiding the currently harsh desert interior. Previous fossil finds show this was not the case, with humans moving into the heart of Arabia at least 85,000 years ago. Now, new research pushes this date back even further. Scientists discovered human and other animal footprints embedded on an ancient lake surface in the Nefud Desert in Saudi Arabia that are around 120,000 years old. These findings represent the earliest evidence for Homo sapiens on the Arabian Peninsula and demonstrates the importance of Arabia for understanding human prehistory. The Nefud Desert in modern-day Saudi Arabia lies around 500 kilometers to the southeast of the Sinai Peninsula. Today, the Arabian deserts are some of the most inhospitable environments in the world. They would form an impassable barrier for prehistoric humans or large mammals. Imagine standing at the foot of a hyper-arid desert equipped with stone tools and not much else. Could you get across? Probably not. Scientific analysis shows that for most of their recent history, they were climatically similar to today, hyper-arid and impassable. But there is also evidence to show that at certain times in the past, the deserts transformed into savanna-like grasslands littered with freshwater resources. These green phases were likely short, probably lasting no more than a few millennia. Nonetheless, they provided windows of opportunity for humans and other animals to move into a new green landscape. We know from fossil lake sediments that the Nefud Desert was one of those that periodically transformed into a more attractive landscape in the past.